In today's show, we talk the value of veterans in the NBA and whether a young team like the Portland Trailblazers is missing an elder statesman. Welcome to Locked On Blazers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Trailblazers, your daily Portland Trailblazers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What up, world? It's your past first point guard and Trailblazers reporter Mike Richmond. Listen to another episode of Locked On Blazers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get podcasts and also on YouTube. Thanks for making the show your first listen, coming at you each and every weekday, Monday through Friday. So make it a part of your daily routine. Make it your first listen. Tell your friends to do the same. It's Locked On Blazers, your team every day. In today's show, we're talking about adults. Gentlemen in their 30s. Not even that old. I want to dive deep into the value of vets. You will see why sort of thematically as we work our way through this episode. But I was prompted sort of down this line of questioning by one, the ability to know how old the Trailblazers are. And I did some reporting. Your boy did journalism. I asked the team specifically about what it's like to be youthful, what it's like to be young. I will share that thoughts from DeAndre Ayton and Jeremy Grant as well as Chauncey Billups in the second segment. But what really prompted me down this path was a profile of Chris Paul in The Athletic. One thing about me, I bundled my New York Times and The Athletic subscription for a very low price. I think it expires in November. Will I still have it when we reach the new year? Stay tuned. I do have multiple email addresses, so I believe in me. But Fred Katz at The Athletic wrote a really interesting profile about Chris Paul and this sort of the tutelage that he is offering to the young Spurs. And that got me thinking about the young Blazers and the tutelage that they are not offered. So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about Chris Paul. I want to talk about the Trailblazers roster, and I want to talk about youth in the league in general. That's what we're going to do in today's show. Trust me, this is going to be more interesting than old player good. I'm not old enough to yell old player good, but I do think there is I do think on a team as young as the Trailblazers, they are missing a sort of institutional knowledge that is not offered to them by their current roster construction. This is a league-wide trend, not unique to the Trailblazers, but broadly speaking, I think they are missing out on some of the magic, the soft magic of institutional knowledge. Been there, done that, probably going to do it again. And few players have been there and done that as much as Chris Paul. A dude who's been in the league for 2 decades and who's always been a bit of a traffic cop. And by that, I mean someone who studies the rule book so obsessively, studies his opponent so obsessively that he knows all the rules and he will get you a technical foul for not having your shirt tucked in because he's on it. But to me, Chris Paul is also probably one of the 5 greatest point guards of all time. He is without a doubt one of the 5 greatest point guards I have ever seen play. I was born in the late 80s. I don't have as deep of appreciation for guys from the early 80s and beyond, but certainly Chris Paul is one of the all-time greats. I am very comfortable in saying that. And in Fred Katz's profile on The Athletic, which I'll link in the episode description for this episode, he mentions the story actually starts. I'm not going to spoil the whole thing. It's pretty long. I'm not going to run you all through it. But I think it is a good it's a good scene setter for what I want to get into today. The anecdotal lead that the story kicks off with is a game against the Portland Trailblazers, where Chris Paul is guarding a Yusuf Nurkic, Damian Lillard pick and roll, and Damian Lillard fades right and tries to flip a bounce pass to Nurk in the pocket. And Chris Paul just sticks his hand out and steals it. This is Phoenix Suns Chris Paul. And he yells to his teammate, Cam Johnson, you gotta watch. Because Chris Paul's seen it on film a cajillion times. When Dame goes right, he passes. When he goes left, he shoots. And honestly, that's true to life. Dame attacks hard left. Always does. Hard left. Always has. Hard left. I probably couldn't have told you at the speed of an NBA game, that when he fades right off a pick that he's going to go back to a pass, but I don't have the computer brain of Chris Paul. I have the slower processing version of Chris Paul's computer brain. I got a lot less RAM up in here. But it's not just the knowing Damian Lillard's tendencies. It's offering the sage wisdom to so many that he's come across in now what has become a bit of a journeyman career for an all-time great. The back half of Chris Paul's career, the thing about playing 20 seasons in the NBA is that the back half of it, you go play for a lot of different teams. And he was already going to be a guy who played for a couple different teams, even in like the height of his career. He's like an all-time great Hornet. He's an all-time great Clipper. He's had, heck, he's probably an all-time great Sun just based on what he did in his brief period there. He's a legend on 3 franchises, and then he's been in a lot of places since then. But in Katz's story, he talks about like Chris Paul talking to Moses Moody when they played together in Golden State last year about learning ref tendencies. He taught Mikal Bridges about his little like transition defense trick where you tap someone on their rib cage on the right-hand side and then you run around the left-hand side and try to get a steal. Real Chris Paul traffic cop stuff. Like, truly. And he talks about his relationship with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. When SGA first got to Oklahoma City, he played on that team with Chris Paul. They made the playoffs, and SGA was like at Chris Paul's house and like learning from him and all those things. Like, really offering the wisdom of someone who is obsessive about basketball. And the real story gets into how obsessive Chris Paul is about basketball. This is this podcast about the Portland Trail Blazers, mind you. They don't have that. The Portland Trail Blazers don't have a Chris Paul. And look, it's hard to find one of the 10 greatest point guards of all time and just add him to the roster. But the Spurs, an incredibly young team with a budding young star in Victor Wembanyama and a coach who probably values institutional knowledge maybe more than any across the entire league, and Greg Popovich, they went out and targeted Chris Paul. They wanted him to be the player, the coach, the sage advice giver, the traffic cop, all of the things that Chris Paul is. Hall monitor that he can be. They wanted him there to do that. They wanted him there to impart the wisdom of ref tendencies and transition defense dark arts and the tendencies of star point guards. When they go right, they do this. When they go left, they do this. And you know it because you've seen it a million times. And not just the tendencies, but how you learn about those tendencies. Here's my process. Here's my obsessive process to learn the way that it works. The Blazers simply don't have that on the roster. Like I said, you can't go get it. This isn't magic. There aren't. Are there any active players that are the 10 best point guards of all time off the top of my head? What position does Luka Doncic play? I don't really think he's a point guard. Certainly a good one. Good basketball player. What do we think James Harden is? He's probably a 2 in his prime. In any case, those players aren't available. That's not what Chris Paul's in a different category. He's older. He's not as good. He's in a different part of his career. All of these things, right? This wasn't available to the Blazers, but it's also something they didn't pursue. They built the roster with intention. They brought everybody back from last year with intention. They chose this path. So I'm not really saying like the Blazers failed because they didn't add Hall of Famer Chris Paul to the roster. What I'm saying is there is a soft magic of roster building. There is a value in institutional knowledge. There is a lot of sort of non-basketball stuff that goes into maybe building the right type of balanced roster. And I don't know that just like add a 38-year-old to the team is exactly what the Blazers need to like be more productive into the future, because you're going to see it like pay dividends down the line. But I'll tell you this, their head coach wishes they had one. And their players, the guys who are quote unquote elder statesmen on this particular team, they feel it too. I talked to them about it last week when I was at the Moda Center. I spent pregame asking them on last Friday, asking them about what it's like to be a young group without an old head to lean on. Let's talk about that. The Portland Trail Blazers in the sort of with the sort of idea that Chris Paul has value even if it's not playing basketball. The Blazers are missing something like that, the soft magic of it. So let's talk about the magic that the Blazers are missing and chose not to pursue in the second segment. Join me there, won't you? First, though, let's talk Gametime. It's the place that rewards you for buying last-minute tickets. Gametime is great because they got so many features that are just designed to help you save money quickly. The number one thing you're gonna get when you open up the Gametime app is curated picks. They got Gametime picks. That's curated selections, so it makes it easier to save money on sporting events you want to go to, on concerts, on comedy, on theater, whatever it is. Say you want to go to a Trailblazers game, download the app, open it up, type in Portland Trailblazers. 3 clicks later, you're looking at a picture of the Moda Center right there on your phone. You'll see the venue right there, crystal clear. And if you see the little Gametime icon, that's a Gametime pick. They got curated selections up close, maybe not as close, and way back. The seats that will save you money. Plus, when I'm using the app, I like to toggle in all-in pricing that shows the total upfront cost, so you don't get any surprise fees at checkout. Plus, if you're going to a new arena you've never been to, you can get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. You can click on it and say, what's the seat view going to be like? And you can just say, okay, it's going to look exactly like that. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime and Gametime picks. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA. You get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account. Use the redemption code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. All right. The Portland Trailblazers are the second youngest team in the NBA, just if you want to do it by raw age. I think the best way to do it is probably weighted average, and because of the Blazers playing some of their older players, I'm going to guess that they're not the youngest team in the league. They'll face the youngest team in the league later this week. Stay tuned. In fact, later today, when you are listening to this, stay tuned. But when the Blazers got thrashed on opening night, when they lost to the Golden State Warriors, and they just looked like they let go of the rope, like they stopped playing hard, like they quit, I was struck by the lack of effort in Game 1 of 81. That's the type of stuff that gets people fired. It's a lose-your-job type of game. And obviously nobody lost their job yet, but it struck me that perhaps the Blazers don't have a tone setter. And I've mentioned this in the past. If you're a longtime listener, shout out to my everydayers. You know that I kind of think the Blazers are missing their emotional core. They don't have that guy on the roster, a rah-rah guy who kind of gets them going. That doesn't necessarily need to be a player who plays. It is helpful if it is, but the Blazers don't have a personality that is like a command the room, here, let's go type of personality. They miss that. Years of Damian Lillard probably atrophied them to the need to go out and search for another one, but they chose not to do it on this team. This team is particularly young, and even their vets aren't really that type of personality. I asked Chauncey Billups prior to the Blazers' first of 2 games against the New Orleans Pelicans. I said, who do you look to when things go south, when things get rocky? Who do you look to kind of right the ship? Who are your leaders? And he said, naturally, you look to the players that are the most veteran players on the team. So Jeremy Grant and Anthony Simons and DeAndre Ayton. Neither of those 3 guys are wired to be the sort of like true leader of a team. And I don't really hold that against them. Jeremy Grant is incredibly quiet. He's a quiet personality. Some people say he likes to lead by example. To me, that's not leading. That's setting an example. Those are 2 different things. Jeremy Grant might very well set an example, but leadership requires sort of a vocal level of participation that Grant just isn't wired to be. Grant is turning 31 in March. He's the eldest player on the roster at a ripe old age of 30. He is playing his 11th season in the NBA with 10 already under his belt. The next most tenured players are DeAndre Ayton and Anthony Simons, who have completed 6 seasons and are beginning the early stages of season 7. So Grant, by far, the player with the most experience on the roster, and it's not like he's old. He hasn't hit his 31st birthday yet. 10 guys on the Blazers roster have played 4 or fewer seasons, with Matisse Thybulle fitting in the middle of the slightly elder statesman folks and the dudes who have not had 5 years in the league yet. This is a young group. I don't hold it against Jeremy Grant that he's not wired that way. I don't hold it against Anthony Simons that he's not wired that way. Though your personality is your personality. It is not your job. Like, it would be nice if everyone grew into a sort of the charismatic leader that could unite a group of high-level athletes and guide them to the promised land. But some dudes aren't wired that way. This is how humans work. It's not Anthony Simons' fault that he is a specific type of human. DeAndre Ayton is certainly not the leadership type of personality. And I'll hold it against DA that he's not a leadership type of personality. The soft magic of building a roster that has leaders does not fall at the feet of the eldest gentleman on the team. There's someone in charge of building the roster. Joe Cronin chose this path. For better or for worse. He is not alone in choosing this path, but this is a trend that has followed the rest of the league, and I'll share a little bit more on that in the third segment, but Cronin chose this path. I asked Chauncey a little bit about just sort of, does the team feel young? Does the league feel young? And he offered a very interesting answer. He said that, yes, the league feels incredibly young and the team feels young, and he feels it every day. And he's mentioned in the past that it's like, even on last year's team, he felt like he was doing a lot of teaching. He was doing himself a lot of sort of leadership stuff that maybe isn't natural for other coaches because the team was particularly young and because of the personalities they have on the roster. But he admitted when I asked him as such that you can't do that every day as a coach. They can't hear your voice like that. You need other folks to provide that encouragement, that institutional knowledge, that like little bit of education, all of those things. It needs to come from different voices. It is very different to hear from a teammate than a coach, and I think Chauncey acknowledges such in a very realistic way. You can't. You just can't. But he also said something I found fascinating. He said, I wish I could play on this team. And he said he's told his guys this, that he wished he was still, not pushing 50, but he wished he was still 37 years old and he could be on the roster and be someone who doesn't play, but is on the team. So he could give them the guidance and show them out on the court, maybe on the practice court, and every so often when he plays every 7th game or something as a deep end of the bench vet. But he could offer some sort of old head insight. When Chauncey Billups broke into the league, he had real vets like Dana Barros and I believe you mentioned Purvis Ellison on his Celtics team before he got dealt. Like people who'd been in the league for over a decade, a long time. So I was curious for guys like Jeremy Grant and Anthony Simons and DeAndre Ayton, and particularly Jeremy Grant, someone who came into the league a decade ago. Was the roster older? Well, how about this? Jeremy Grant came onto the Process Sixers, a team that maybe pioneered this movement where every single player on the roster needs to be an upside dart throw and you don't prioritize veterans. In fact, the Sixers were, in Jeremy Grant's rookie seasons, maligned for having these aimless, super young teams that were designed to lose and lacked a veteran presence. And even then, on Jeremy Grant's rookie year team, Jason Richardson, who was entering his 13th NBA season, was Jeremy Grant's vet. He told me as much. And I said, who other vets did you have? He said, believe it or not, Elton Brand. In year 2, Jeremy Grant's second season in Philadelphia, Elton Brand, year 17 in the NBA, came and joined the Process Sixers. Even on a team that pushed this trend a decade ago into every single roster spot needs to be a young player with upside, the Process Sixers had vets, like old head vets. DeAndre Ayton in his rookie season in Phoenix, Tyson Chandler year 17, Jamal Crawford playing his 18th season, and Trevor Ariza playing his 14th season. That team wasn't good. Not quite yet, but they had old heads. He was learning from dudes who had been there and seen it, and a lot of it. Anthony Simons played on a pretty darn young team in 2018-19. I believe what Neil Olshey used to brag was the youngest team to make the playoffs. Congrats, bro. You did it. But even then, on a strikingly young Blazers team in 2018-19 with Anthony Simons, there were 7 guys with at least 5+ seasons of NBA experience who had already played 5 when the season started. The Blazers have 4 of those dudes, if you throw in Matisse Thybulle. So almost twice as many of those sort of, been there, done that second contract veterans than the Blazers have. Portland is remarkably young, and they have chosen this path. And I think one of the reasons that one of the challenges of this season is without like true leadership and without a back half of the roster that offers institutional knowledge, there are going to be nights when things go south and they are just missing the voice of reason. They are missing someone to get them right. They are missing someone to say, that's not the way we do it. This is how we do it. They're just missing the like, hey, dude, when we get to Orlando, this is the best place to eat. The NBA season is long. The traveling team is like 40 people on a pirate ship. Missing someone who can guide you through the madness and the slog of the NBA season is a challenge. And it's a path the Blazers chose. But let me tell you this. It's a path dang near every team in the league is choosing now. I think the Blazers earnestly are missing this. And I think one of the challenges of a team in a rebuilding cycle like Portland is that they're going to have guys who are not shown the way. And maybe they get lost a little bit further into the wilderness as they try to grow up. And maybe they don't form bad habits, but they don't form the sharpest version of the habits they could if they had the Chris Paul obsessively teaching them how to game the traffic light. But here's the thing. The Blazers aren't the youngest team in the league. On Friday evening, later this week, I screwed up and said it was Wednesday. I got ahead of myself. On Friday evening, later this week, the Blazers are going to play the youngest team in the league. And that team might win the dang NBA championship. Let's talk about youth. And I got a great stat courtesy of me, with a little assist from Tom Haberstroh. Join me and let's talk about the youth movement across the league and why it doesn't always matter, even though I think it often does. Join me in the third segment. Still a pass first point guard. Still Mike Richmond. You're still listening to Locked On Blazers. Still talking about the value of vets. I earnestly believe the Blazers are missing institutional knowledge. They're not only missing institutional knowledge, they're missing the sort of the personality that offers leadership. It doesn't have to be an old person. And here's some stats for you. I've been hinting at this, but I'll give it to you. The Blazers are the second youngest team in the league, according to the NBA.com's season roster survey that they released before the season. The Blazers' average age, just raw age when you average the age on the rosters on opening night, is 24.2, the second youngest team in the league. Their average number of NBA seasons is 3, the second lowest in the league in terms of average seasons played. They're a team with limited experience. They're a team that can't rent a rental car without paying premiums. Ahead of them on that list, both lists, age and experience, the Oklahoma City Thunder. A team that rocks. A team that looks incredible this year. A team that has seen young players take big steps forward. A team that is led by Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who is, maybe he is learning from the soft magic of Chris Paul during his second NBA season, but what he is a darn good MVP level candidate alongside Chet Holmgren, who has been fantastic to begin this season, and an average age on the roster of 24.148 according to NBA.com, slightly younger than the Portland Trailblazers, and an average experience of 2.56 seasons, about a half season less than the Blazers. Incredibly young and about a half season less experienced, and they're the favorites to win the West and have been great to begin the season. Age isn't all of it, But what makes the Thunder so special is that they have a sort of like collegiate Thunder U atmosphere. And I think this is the challenge of team building. And I think in a way that maybe something the Blazers have missed on. There is a soft magic to team building. There is an art to getting it right. It is a talent league. The number one thing you can do is get talented players, and the reason that OKC is good is because Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is so friggin' talented, because Chet Holmgren's so talented, because J-Dub is so talented, and because Aaron Wiggins is magic, and they've got a really good coach. It isn't just Aaron Wiggins, but he's among the magic, right? He's been really good to begin the season. Talent wins. Talent wins. It isn't just that you figure out the magic of chemistry, but certainly there's something to it. There is some unknowable blend of ingredients that creates a perfect atmosphere of good chemistry. And now I would say reporters generally speak of the Blazers of having good vibes, but do they play like a team that has excellent chemistry? Do you watch them play and say, yo, that team has great chemistry? Or do you hear reports that these dudes get along in the locker room? Those are different things. Enjoying each other's company and having true chemistry that makes a basketball team tick is a different thing. Talent is going to be the number one thing that matters, but the soft art is sort of lost on some. The Blazers have not perfected that art. OKC has perfected it in a way that I don't think even they could have predicted. But go watch an Oklahoma City post-game interview where they're all barking, or Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is introducing all of his teammates on the TNT broadcast so Jared Greenberg doesn't miss someone's name. And tell me that they haven't mastered the soft art of team building, the magic of chemistry, whatever mix of ingredients creates the perfect team that really fits together and defies the need to be veteran. They're missing it. They're the exception to the rule, and they are the exceptional exception to the rule. They're really freaking good. It isn't just old versus young. There is a magic to it. I think institutional knowledge matters, but I think the team chemistry thing is sort of an unknowable element that, to my eyes, the Blazers do not have. I mentioned that this isn't unique to Portland, right? Like there's a really freaking good team that's incredibly young. So it's not all youth, right? It's not all youth. I think they're missing some institutional knowledge. I think they're missing some veteran wisdom and some veteran guile. I think they're missing some of that toughness, both mental and physical, that comes from, I lasted in the league for 17 seasons, young whippersnapper, let me show you how you do it. But the league is heading this way. According to Tom Haberstroh, and this is a bit of an older podcast, this is way back when, Basketball Illuminati, in an episode that released in March of 2023. It'll be linked in the episode description for this episode. Tom and his co-host Amin Al-Hassan discussed how in 2001, the 35% of the league was north of 30. That means 1 in 3 players on the court had already celebrated their 30th birthday. So I was curious, what's that like now? Haberstroh mentioned that at the end of the 2022-2023 season, we were down to 20%. But what about now in 2024, a couple years later, a couple seasons later? According to Basketball Reference, through games played on Monday, you are listening to Wednesday, October 30th show, but I'm recording this on Tuesday night, and Basketball Reference has an update overnight. So through games played on Monday, October 28th, 400 different players had appeared in an NBA game, had played at least 1 minute in an NBA game this season. 21% of them had celebrated their 30th birthday, 84 out of 400. 21%. So in 25 years, or roughly, but from 2001 until 2024, the drop from 35% of the league being 30 to 21%. I asked Chauncey Billups, does the league feel younger? And he said, boy, does it. He said, I don't have the number. I couldn't tell you the number, but it feels incredibly young. Billups lamented it. He wishes he could be the guy on this back half of the roster. He sees this team and feels they are missing that, an old head to guide them. And I'll leave you with this fun anecdote. I'm asking DeAndre Ayton about his vets and playing with this team and what it's like to be an elder statesman on a young roster. He said, I'm 26 years old. I'm not old. I'm a young man. And Scoot calls me Unc. 26 years old, and Scoot gives him the moniker, the title Unc, usually bestowed on old heads, truly the elder statesman of the world that you encounter. Thanks, Unc. At 26 years old, DeAndre Ayton is Unc. The Blazers are missing Unc. They're missing someone who's Unc. They are missing an uncle. Blazers got a lot of nephews. And that is their challenge moving forward. There is a soft magic of nephews that you will see on Friday. A bunch of youngsters when OKC comes to town. But the Blazers are missing it. And when I'm watching this team this season, I am struck that DeAndre Ayton is the old head, Unc. He's the guy who's going to guide them out of the mud. He's just not equipped to do that. He doesn't have the personality. Neither does Anthony Simons, and neither does Jeremy Grant. And that is none of their faults. They didn't build this roster. Heck, Joe Cronin did, and he built it in a way that is a trend across the league. Every single position has to be a young player with upside. The league has devalued vets over the last 25 years to the tune of about a 35% decrease, from 35% down to 20% of the league at least 30 years old. A trend across the league that I think will be a challenge for the Blazers as they move forward. And if they are to make moves this season, if possible, I would prioritize institutional knowledge. Someone who's been there and done that and doesn't necessarily need to play or cut into playing time, but can be on the plane and on the practice court and in the locker room and all the places that you can be as a 35-year-old person who's seen a whole bunch of stuff, and bestow that knowledge to a roster desperate for it. Okay, tomorrow night, Blazers play the Clippers. I'll talk about that game. I guess tonight, as you're listening to this, they play the Clippers Wednesday evening. I'll talk about that game I'll talk about that game on Thursday's show. I appreciate you listening. I'll talk to you soon.